Well, welcome back to the Cordell Cordell and Men's Divorce podcast and videocast. I'm Scott Trout, CEO and managing partner of Cordell Cordell. We continue to bring you information as it's affected by COVID-19 and really information in general with regards to how men deal with family law and the issues surrounding it in all aspects, whether it's property, custody, support issues, visitation, contempt, paternity. We've been covering it for the last 14 weeks and we'll continue to do so in this podcast and try to bring you that information and the issues that you've been asking questions about. We'll bring those as topics to you as we do it twice each week moving forward. Don't forget to join our town hall coming up. I think it's on July the 10th. Look to Cordell Cordell for information on that town hall where we'll talk about specific issues with regards to divorce. As always, we want to warn you that this isn't legal advice. I have a statute or state limitations in Missouri, Illinois, and Georgia, and my guest in Indiana. But Brandon's joining us from our Cordell Cordell office in Indianapolis. Welcome.
Hi, thanks, Scott.
So, before we get into the topic that we haven't addressed yet, which is so important in dividing property, and specifically we talk about retirement accounts, a lot of questions about it. Again, not legal advice. Don't take it as such. Your facts and circumstances, and in particular, your assets, as we talk about them today, may dictate and will likely dictate a different conversation and different direction. So this is just really to get you some information, an educational point, just to have you tips to seek out an attorney who specifically practices exclusively in family law. And obviously, we're available for a consultation if you need it, 866-DADS-LAW, or again, you can find us on the web at CordellCordell.com. Brandon, one of the things that we often get a lot of questions about it because it's a very emotional topic is the idea of retirement plans. And there are so many different forms of them and really depends on what work needs to be done during and after. And there's some very specific things that need to be dealt with depending upon the type of retirement plan you have. We've got IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, pension plans, whether they're defined, contributory or not. We can get really, really technical here about it. So let's just kind of break it down and start right away. And I imagine it's important. Identify what type of retirement account you have. That's the first place to start.
Well, yeah, and Scott, I agree. This is one of those areas where the technicalities can become very difficult. One of the reasons I like talking about this, and I'm so passionate about this subject, is that it is one of those things that can greatly impact a dissolution of marriage. And I don't think a lot of people go into this really prepared for what that's going to look like. And knowing what kind of plan you've got, knowing how that can be handled in the divorce, and knowing how that's going to impact your case is going to be very important. And so really what I want to do today is and talk a little bit about how you can figure that out. What do you have? What sorts of things do you need to be on the lookout for? And so really when we start talking about retirement plans, the first thing we want to know is, what do we have? And we can break it down into a couple of broad categories. The first broad category I would suggest looking at is your plan going to be employer-based or is it non-employer-based? That's going to have a huge impact on what you have to do in order to divide the plan, should that become necessary. The next thing you're going to look at is, do you have a plan that is, if it is employer-based plan, is it a private employer or do you have a government employer? One of the distinctions that a lot of people miss out on is you have very different rules if you have a plan that is sponsored by the federal government, by a state government, versus a plan that's sponsored by your private employer. And most people are going to have those private employer plans, but if you've got something else, you need to be aware of that. The other big question that we're always looking for is the way the plan is going to be handled by the plan administrator. Is it going to be what we call a defined benefit plan or a defined contribution plan? Now, rather than getting into the technicalities of how all of that works, I think the easiest way to think about that for our purposes and for the purposes of people going through a divorce is ask yourself, is this a plan that pays out on a monthly basis, like an annuity, or is this a plan that is like a savings account that invests the money and grows over time? That's the big difference there. And the distinction, whether it's employer versus non-employer, state government, federal government versus private employer, defined benefit versus defined contribution, when we're looking at that, all of those distinctions tell us as attorneys a whole lot of information about what we can do with the plan, what it looks like when we divorce, and how we can find ways to protect our clients and make sure that they're not going to end up walking out of this thing with less money than they thought they were going to have. And in some cases, take advantage of the fact that other sides may not be paying attention.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it is, you save all your life, or you have this, as you suggest, perhaps an annuity. And that's the big question. Everyone knows, oh, you can split knives and forks and washers and dryers and flip a coin to figure that out. But it's a really sensitive topic when we're talking about dividing something you've worked your entire life. You may have a guy this is their second marriage, and he's worked 40 years to save up in his retirement. That's all he has. You may have some big assets, but it is very emotional. And I think, once you identify the type so that your lawyer can really know the proper way to divide it, because, there are ways. Obviously, we talk about domestic relations orders or qualified orders that deal with federal law and ERISA. But I guess the question guys are going to, say is, hey, I don't want her touching my retirement or my pension. That's mine. Right. And so separating themselves, at least from the emotional aspect, how do you deal with that when, somebody, and I understandably, guy's worked all of his life, maybe pre-marriage, for that pension. He may be construction, he may be, journeyman, whatever it is. How do you deal with that?
Scott, that's a really good question to bring up, because it absolutely is one of the hardest things, I think, for people to deal with, is the idea that the retirement plan, the plan for the future, my ability to find a time when I'm going to stop working. You plan all of this as a couple, as you're working together in a marriage, and you think this is what we need in order to retire and do that, so that we've got enough that we can take care of ourselves. And what you find when you get divorced, and this is, of course, the thing no one tells you when you're getting married, it's that all of those plans, all of the great plans that you put together as a married couple, when you separate and you now have two homes, two different households that are going to somehow survive independently of one another, what that's going to look like. And so we walk into these things very blind, I think, when we get married. But at the same time, the thing that we've got to remember as advocates for men who typically have been the ones that have been contributing to these retirement plans, throughout time, what we have to do is we have to remember that the way that the court's going to look at it, and the way that the legislatures that have made the laws look at it, they're not looking at it from the standpoint of who did the work. They're looking at it from, why did you do the work, right? Mm-hmm. Why were you saving? Why were you doing all of this? And they're going to look at it and they're going to say, well, we're going to presume, absent some good reason not to, that you did this. You did these good things for the sake of the marriage. It's an old adage I like to apply to divorce law, is no good deed goes unpunished. Mm-hmm. And nowhere can that be more clear than in terms of division of property, and especially with these retirement plans. And so the better you do, the more you save, the more you stand to potentially lose going over to your ex-spouse. And that's an incredibly emotional thing, because we plan our futures on that. And so one of the things that we like to do is help counsel our clients who go into this and make sure that we're prepared, that this is something that may happen. But mm-hmm. just as importantly, part of our job is also to look at, is this something that has to happen? For example, and this is something that's true in Indiana, in the state of Indiana, if you are a member of the military and you have military retired pay and you divorce after 19 years in the military, because you haven't hit that 20th year, which is the year that pension becomes vested in you, mm-hmm. in the state of Indiana, that's not a divisible asset and it's not a consideration. That's not true of every state. So having an attorney that's aware of these things about the law in your state, that can help you to figure out, can you protect these assets? You don't want to go in and sign an agreement that says, I'm going to pay out money because I think I'm going to spend another year in the Navy and get this great pension, if you don't have to. And right. So knowing where there are ways we can avoid that is every bit as important as also being prepared mentally for the reality of what might be coming.
Yeah, similar to the military, as you suggest, it may be the same in Indiana or in other states. Missouri has one with teacher retirement. Public teacher retirement is not divisible by the court. It is separate property. But there's some case law that talks about, albeit that the court can't divide it by statute, they must consider it or can consider it in the ultimate division, which means we can kind of throw it in the mix. We just can't divide it. We can't give half to dad or half to mom or whatever it may be, but you can allocate other property, which brings up my other point when we talk about the emotional aspect of it. And that is what I've done historically is, if it's very important from a psychological standpoint to my client that that pension not be touched, then understandably. So we talk about trading off other assets. Is that something you've done in your practice, is to say, okay, let's give them more of the equity. Let's give them more of whatever it may be, other property that we have, which comes with caution, right? Because you have to think about the tax effects of each piece of property. But is that something you've done?
Oh, absolutely. But when you say you have to think about the tax effects, that really is getting into one of the most important things that we have to keep in mind when we start talking about horse trading with our retirement plans. Retirement plans are, and this goes right back to what we started with, which was how do you determine what kind of plan you've got? Because that's going to tell you a little bit about what kind of tax consequences you're going to face. A great example is this teacher pension you've just described. Indiana has a similar rule. If somebody is going to be awarded money to offset a teacher pension, how do you know what that's worth? A pension plan, an annuity style plan that pays out on a monthly basis, typically from retirement or date that you're able to start drawing until the day you die, knowing what that's worth is something that requires an expert opinion. And even then, we're still just saying, well, based on the numbers, it's probably worth this. And so in order to try to figure out how do I divide that in a way that that I can offset other assets against it, that can be a challenge. So when we're talking about those types of plans, we're looking at experts and we're talking to them to say, what is this plan worth? And not just what is it worth to the pensioner. We also want to know what is that going to be worth if there's, say, a survivor benefit that attaches to it to the other party. Where you have a large age disparity, there may be a lot of value that's going to be available to your former spouse if she's going to continue collecting after you've passed away. And you don't want to leave that on the table. You've got to find out what that is as well. Your attorney might be able to sit down and crunch numbers if they've got the education, but ultimately we need a witness who can come in and express that to the court and also say it in a way that's going to hopefully convince the other side that they need to listen to things our way. And even when you're talking about other plans, when you're looking at your more standard 401k plans, that's your account style that's growing and investing over time. Even that isn't really something you can look at on a dollar for dollar basis. So let's say you've got a house and you're going to have one party keep the house and you're going to offset the value of that equity out of a retirement plan. You can't simply look at that 401k and say, well, there's $50,000 in equity here and there's $50,000 in the 401k. Let's call it even. I mean, I suppose you can, but someone's going to get a bad deal there. That 401k is all pre-tax dollars. It is worth dollar for dollar less than the money that the equity in that house is worth. And that's a consideration that we need to be cognizant of as attorneys. And really, it's very important for people going through the divorce themselves to be aware of those distinctions so that they are able to talk about this effectively with their attorneys.
For some dads out there, the coronavirus pandemic has become a pretext to limit access to their children. Other dads have been pushed out of key decisions affecting their children's lives. If you're one of those dads, Cordell Cordell is here for you, as always, but with expanded services. We can meet you in person or by video conference on weekdays, evenings, or weekends. Our goal is to step up our service to meet your needs now.
Yeah, there's so many intricacies. It's easy, as you suggested, just say, oh, 50-50. If they each have 50, just trade them. I mean, I've been on the winning side of that where the other attorney just makes that same mistake. And, another big one is when you divide it, the temptation is to award a specific dollar amount to your spouse and say, okay, she's short 25,000. I'm going to give her 25,000 out of my account. Well, the problem with that is it doesn't take into consideration the gains and losses, perhaps. Let's say, in this market, if you did that pre-COVID and some, these accounts are wiped out, you may not have 25,000 left to give her. I think that's just a danger. It's one of the things that I think if guys are watching right now, they have to know this probably is one of the most important things to ensure that you've gone through all facets. Like the one thing that always comes to mind is the surviving spouse benefits rights with regards to some pensions. That is an asset that should be traded away, not given away. Guys overlook that.
No, I agree, absolutely. And ultimately, I think what we want to be thinking about when we're talking about these retirement plans from day one, when we're thinking about what are we going to do here, we do want to avoid those. How do I just find a dollar payout if we don't have a way to offset those tax considerations? One of the other things that really I think is important to keep in mind from day one is there something you can be doing to protect these assets? For example, I'm currently licensed in Indiana. I used to be licensed in Colorado, and we had two very different rules that have very different impacts on the way that you would handle a retirement plan. In Colorado, what the court would do is they would look, if possible, at the date of final dissolution. So when the day your case ended is the day that they would place a value on everything. So if you have a case that lasts 2 years, you can imagine that from the date that the case begins to the date that it ends, you can see a significant difference in the value of those assets. Indiana, on the other hand, tends to look at the date of filing for valuing your assets. And that changes the way that you're going to want to look at how do I protect my asset. Here in Indiana, I'm not too worried if my client continues to contribute money to a 401k. But in Colorado, if my client continued to put money into a 401k while that case was pending, all of those additional contributions are now part of that to be divided at the end of the case. So this is another place where you really want to make sure that you're talking to somebody who is aware of the local rules, who knows what the law is there, because that's going to impact how you're able to best protect yourself going into this.
Yeah. That you suggest that's a huge point. Guys ask the question, should I keep contributing? Because in Missouri, 50 cents of every dollar you put in is going to be hers because it's date of actually judgment that they're going to be valuing things, typically date of trial. Or as close to the judgment as you can get. And so it does. Again, guys watching, these are the questions you need to ask. What's the law regarding, that? Can I borrow against my 401k? Is it, is that I need to pay attorney's fees? Is that something I should be doing? Those are the questions I think every guy has, and not to gloss over. It really dovetails nicely into the 10 stupidest mistakes seminar that we do. And one of them is really paying attention to not only your financial statement, but your property statement. Because those assets, everything is so important, because when you divide it at the end of the day, when it's over, you shouldn't have regrets and look back and say, oh, I forgot about that. That's worth X dollars and I didn't divide it in this 401k. And it's so complicated that it does require, as you suggest, perhaps even evaluation. So when guys are thinking about this, Brandon, what do they look for in an attorney? Is they're thinking about a divorce, for example, we have a tax and benefits department who, can't go so far as to value it, but can provide some assistance. Is that important?
Oh, absolutely. When you're looking at an attorney and you're trying to assess who am I going to have represent me in a dissolution of marriage action, I mean, obviously the most important piece of this in my mind is always going to be, is this an attorney I can have a good relationship with? Is this someone I can talk to who's going to inform me? But you also need to be sure that they either have the information, the knowledge that they need, or they have a place where they can get it. And that, of course, Scott, is one of the things that I love about what we have at Cordell Cordell is, of course, not only do we have excellent attorneys already working on these cases, we have a huge safety net of places we can look. If there's something that somebody hasn't experienced, doesn't know about, they can look at that. And talking about our quadro department is very important. We have a department that is staffed by attorneys who have an advanced law degree, a master's of law in taxation, that that they've worked for in order to be able to determine how to best handle situations that arise not just through retirement plans, but also to a certain extent other tax issues that come up. We haven't even begun to talk about the issue of basis when we're dividing property. That's perhaps a meeting for another day. But having that available, having somebody who we can turn to if ever there's something we don't know, that's one of the most invaluable things that we've got. And I think when you're looking at an attorney, you definitely want to consider, does this attorney have the resources that they need in order to be able to help?
Yeah, it's key. I mean, you want to have those resources, have the ideas, have the connections, really, I mean, it's having done this for me with 27 years and the firm at 30 years, it just comes with experience. It comes with representing, tens of thousands of guys over time. And as you suggest, with us being nationwide, it does help. And having those within LLM and tax and our department, it does help. So, we could go on and on, I think, for an hour on this. And what we're going to do is, you're watching right now, and we just piqued your interest and we've just really scratched the surface. We'll do one of the monthly seminars in the virtual town hall on this, because I find that it's so valuable and interesting that we can not only talk about the division of retirement, but property, talking about real estate, all the things in which really it's the giant part of a divorce process that perhaps gets overlooked. So look for that probably in August. We'll touch that subject as we divide property and really dig down for an hour. And you can log in and ask questions in our virtual town hall and engage with our Cordell and Cordell attorneys. So Brandon, thanks for just, again, scratching the surface on this great, important topic.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott. I really enjoy getting a chance to talk about this.
Yeah, great. Well, we'll look forward to talking about it again in August, and continue to tune in to our weekly podcast, which we're doing it twice a week now. We'll continue to bring you information regarding family law that many guys just seem to overlook. We'll get you some of those specifics. Again, if you need a consultation, we're available via telephone, virtual, and where appropriate, in person, where of course we consider health and safety as a priority. Each county and state has their own rules, but give us a call at 866-DADS-LAW, or you can find us on the web at CordellCordell.com. Don't forget to tune in to our virtual town hall in July. Find the information and register online at CordellCordell.com. Until next time, have a great week.